please start with your name, age, and where you were born.
My name is John Lim. I'm 51, and I was born in Brooklyn, New York.
Did you grow up in a pretty Korean household, or was it more Americanized?
I would say it was more Americanized. I mean, both my parents, as you know, they're Korean, but they never emphasized speaking Korean at home. In fact, my father used to worry that it would hinder me learning English, so he purposely didn't teach us Korean. So it was almost exclusively English at home.
And at school, was it a more predominantly white school, elementary school, middle school?
Yeah, so I went to Roslyn High School, which was predominantly white. I think back then we were one of maybe 3 Korean families. Yeah, I grew up as one of the few Koreans in school, and I noticed it, and I felt it.
Was that hard for you?
You know, it was hard at times. I mean, I think I managed. Fortunately, my parents met a group of people mostly through church, and I became friends with their kids. Mm-hmm. And I'm still friends with them today. Mm-hmm. So having kind of like a Korean American community that I could hang out with made things easier. Yeah, so my parents came in the 60s. Mm-hmm. They were both doctors. They actually met at the hospital as residents. They basically raised us very Americanized. Mm-hmm. I mean, we ate Korean food, obviously, and my parents spoke Korean to each other, mm-hmm. but to my brother and I, it was, we communicated in English.
Were you close with your family growing up?
I think, like a lot of Korean American guys, I think I had a difficult relationship with my father. I mean, I was close with my mother. She was very supportive, because it wasn't always easy being, the Korean American kid in town. But yeah, my father and I had a strained relationship. His father died when he was really young. Mm-hmm. So I think, he's told me, now that we're adults, he's told me that it was always hard for him to be a father just because he really didn't have one. Mm-hmm. So I just know that raising you and your sister, I just always wanted to make sure that, that you were always happy to see me, and that, that we got along, and that I try to relate to you, which was sometimes difficult for my father. So, but, since once I got into college, I mean, we got along much better, and as you know, the relationship now is fine. It's great.
So, as some people know, you are now the owner of a brewery, which is pretty cool. So, can you tell me about your career path, like starting from college and how you got there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a circuitous route that I took. And, I always tell you to try to plan things, but I can't say that things were necessarily planned for myself. I remember as a senior at Cornell, graduating soon, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life and needing a job. So I literally rode my bike to the career office and started looking through job posts. And I came across a consulting position with Price Waterhouse, which struck my attention. So I applied, did the interview, and I ultimately got the job. And it was sheer luck that I happened to find that position. It worked out really well. It was a great company. I was really happy to have that job. Mm-hmm. I think I also knew that I wanted to go to law school after working for a couple of years. I do think one of my regrets is that I didn't really put more thought into what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be. I went to Boston University School of Law. Mm-hmm. And, I had a great time there, probably more fun than I should have. I started working for a firm in New York City called Ornstein and Brown, which was on the 85th floor of One World Trade Center. And I mean, you weren't born, but everyone knows what happened. And, the firm actually lost 2 people. And, this is fairly soon after I started working there. And your mother and I had just recently gotten married. So it was a pretty tumultuous start to my legal career here in New York. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I worked for another firm. Ultimately went in-house to AIG, big insurance company. Yeah, so I stayed there for several years. I enjoyed it, but it really wasn't, in my mind, like just very fulfilling, you know, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of, you know, planning your career and knowing what you want to do and knowing what excites you. And, you know, it was hard for me to say that insurance law was really exciting to me. But, so, you know, with your mom's support, I quit. It was difficult for me to kind of like figure out what I wanted to do with my life once I stopped being a lawyer. And I probably should have given that more thought before just jumping in, but that's what I did. And then fast forward to, gosh, around 2017, and it's actually through this organization, Korean American Story, that one of the other board members, Yoon, brought a bottle of this makgeolli to a Korean American Story barbecue. And I remember trying it and saying to her immediately, who is this? Like, who's doing this? Who's making this? And she told me he was a friend of hers in Brooklyn. So she made the introduction, and Alice, my business partner, and I met. And, you know, after about a year of discussions and just talking and going back and forth, we decided to give it a shot. And, you know, I'm proud of how far we've come. I think it's, for me, much closer, or maybe even perfect, a fit for who I am and what my interests are. But also, you know, we're really proud of the fact that we're making a Korean product, and that no one else is making here in the United States. You know, I look at the brewery as a very Korean American company. We're making a very traditional Korean product, but we're doing it in a modern way, using, you know, modern equipment. So I think very much like myself, the brewery is sort of reinforcing my Korean American identity.
So like, did you want us, I guess, to grow up in a more Americanized household like you did? Did you think that would be easier for us, or? I
don't know that I gave it that much thought, but I will say that I think your mother and I will have different answers to that. You know, obviously your mother is a lot more Koreanized than I am, and she speaks fluent Korean. I know your grandparents were really happy about the fact back then that you spoke such good Korean, and I think that's definitely attributable to having a Korean live-in, or not a live-in, but a Korean nanny full-time who spoke to you exclusively in Korean. I think just naturally, just given the fact that I can hardly speak Korean, you know, that you were going to learn both languages, but that eventually, you know, English would probably win out. I'd like to think that you're pretty comfortable in your identity, and that, you know, that we've taught you to be proud of who you are, but certainly proud of the Korean side of your heritage. And I'm thankful that I haven't seen anything in you or your sister where where you weren't happy that you were Korean, that you had Korean identity or Korean heritage. You two have always seemed fairly proud of that point, and that's been a big relief to see.
What was the happiest moment of your life, or moments?
Well, obviously, when you and your sister were born, those were probably the two happiest days of my life. Marrying your mother also, but really specifically, the days that you and your sister were born were really, really fun and happy days. Obviously, I'll never forget it. Just like recently, you know, seeing you get into Cornell, as you know, I mean, we were jumping around like we just won the World Cup because we were so excited. That was just a real sweet moment for me, you know, not just because, you know, I went there and your mother went there, but there was just something about the fact of seeing you get into the same school. You know, I never really thought of myself as like a school spirit kind of person, but it was really exciting for me, and a really touching thing for me to see you get into the same school and know that you're going to be going there.
Can you think of the saddest moment in your life?
Yeah, I think the one thing that comes to my mind is my grandfather. He and I were really close. I grew up spending summers with him and my other Toronto family pretty much every summer when I was a kid. And it was like a second home to me. So yeah, my grandfather and I, he was a real tennis player, so I would play tennis with him, and those were like some of my fondest memories. And I still remember, him kissing me on the cheek with his stubble and how much it hurt and things like that. And he was always so proud of me, which was very meaningful for me. Probably about a month before your mother and I got married, I remember I got a call from my uncle telling me that he passed. And yeah, that was terrible. I mean, it was probably the saddest moment in my life.
If you had one message to pass along to me and Emily, and then future granddaughters and grandsons, and then like generations, what would that message be?
I would say be happy. That's at the end of the day all I care about. That you and your sister are happy. I would say, and I've touched on this before, but just appreciate the time you have. Try to make good decisions. I think if you're going to get married, if that's in your future, choose wisely. I think the person you marry is going to have a real big effect on your life, but just everything. But really, it's mostly just appreciating the time that you do have and making the most of it while you're there. I don't want you to have any regrets about, I wish I had done this differently or tried harder or something. And I always say those things about myself. I would just say, make the most of each moment and be present and enjoy it.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, honey. My name is John Lin, and this is my Korean American story.